All right, hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Matt Kopchak, and I'm the Vice President of Operations with Worth Ross Management Company. I hope you all are doing well, and I wanted to thank you all for joining us for the September speaker series. For those of you joining us for the first time, welcome. Thanks for joining, and those of you that are returning, thank you as well. For the new folks on the call, the speaker series was designed by Nicole and the team at Worth Ross to give our board and team members an exclusive opportunity to hear from industry-leading experts. Our hope is that tonight you'll gain some valuable insight, learn about the best practices, and have the opportunity to ask some questions of our panelists. Our guest speakers throughout this whole series have been carefully selected and are familiar with the specific needs, challenges, and opportunities that association boards and managers are faced with day in and day out. Just a reminder that before we get too far into this evening, that we are recording this session. So if anything was missed or you want to reference back to it later, it will be available on our YouTube channel, and Nicole will circulate that link once it's published and live to our team, and they can share it with the boards. And so with that leads us right into today's topic, which is protect your structure, cover your assets. So with me tonight, we have a team from Pi Engineering. I'm going to hand it off to Jack Thuit here in a minute for introductions. But before I do, I just want to go over the format for tonight's presentation. So Pi will be presenting for 35 to 45 minutes. And then we will address any questions that were submitted either in advance or throughout the presentation after they've completed the entire presentation. So if anything comes to mind as they are going through, feel free to chat those into myself, and I will ask them of the group, of the panelists, once the presentation is complete. So with that, Jack, I'm gonna pass it over to you so you can introduce your team.
Awesome, thank you, Matt, and echoing Matt, thanks everybody for joining us this evening. We're really excited to share some insight on how structural failures occur and what to look for in your buildings as you're walking around the properties. I know with recent events, we hope that this information is very educational and relevant to you as responsible managers of your condominium association. So thanks again for joining us. So starting with the agenda, Sam, if you could advance the slide for me. Thank you. So what we're going to talk about today is just an introduction of ourselves and our firm overall, and then we'll move into the different types of structural failures that we get the privilege to investigate across the country and internationally. We're going to fold in some case studies, and then I think what's going to be most important and applicable to you folks on the condominium association side will be, what are the warning signs and when do you respond when you see something? And so after that, as Matt has alluded to, we'll open it up to Q&A, and we'll look forward to some back and forth with the audience to answer any questions you have. With that, my name is Jack Thuit. I'm a director here with Pi Consulting and Engineering. Been with the business now for about 8 years, starting originally in our Denver office and then moving down to Texas just in 2019. Surrounded by a fantastic team here of about 25 folks, with 2 sitting in the room here with me today. So Sam Ganma and Dirk Carvajal. I'll let you guys introduce yourselves.
Howdy, I'm Dirk Carvajal. Got my bachelor's and master's from Texas A&M University. I've been an engineer for approximately 25 years, have designed buildings throughout the U.S., accounting for wind loads in Florida, earthquakes in California, snow loads in Minnesota, and soils in Texas. So run the full gamut of there. Been doing forensics for approximately 17 years and have seen buildings fail for all those reasons, plus many more. Worked Hurricane Katrina, numerous building collapses, etc. Been with Pi for a little bit less than half a year, and am the director of the Forensic Science Group as well as the Rehab Building Group.
Thanks, Dirk. My name is Sam Ganma. I'm a licensed professional engineer in Texas and Louisiana. I've got approximately 10 years of experience in structural design and forensics. I did a lot of residential and commercial design, and recently got into pure forensics approximately 2 years ago. I've got my bachelor's in civil engineering from the University of Texas at Arlington, and look forward to presenting.
Awesome. So quick overview on our firm. We are PI Consulting and Engineering, and forensic engineering and repair design consulting is really what we do. So, you know, what is forensic engineering? It's the investigation of failures. In fact, the term PI was originally professional investigative engineers. So we see a lot of building failures, and I would say that predominantly these are a result of moisture intrusion through the envelope that leads to structural degradation. So we're going to be talking a lot about how that shows up, because that is the silent killer when it comes to your structure. We do, you know, provide a variety of different services to support our forensic engineering needs. We do a lot of work with insurance companies on catastrophe response. You mentioned hurricanes a moment ago. We see tornado claims, hail claims, you name it. And that makes up about 50% of our business. And so if you would, Sam, advance one more. The other 50% of our business is on the new construction side, where we'll consult directly to architects, developers, general contractors on how to avoid those costly mistakes related to building enclosure failures. So how do you detail complex interfaces at various transitions between materials on your facilities if you've got pool decks over occupied space or other unique conditions on the building? We provide a technical expertise to those individuals to ensure that they are designed, constructed, and ultimately tested to meet that design intent. And so with that, one last slide, a quick overview of where we sit in the nation. So we are headquartered in Denver. We've got an office here in Dallas, and I believe next week we will actually have a physical presence in Austin as well. Of course, we've got a presence in California, Minnesota, and South Carolina to support our clients nationally and internationally. So with that, I'd like to hand it over to Dirk to begin some of the technical content of the presentation.
Thanks, Jack. Kind of an outline is we're going to touch on some of the main structural failure causes that we encounter in our investigations, and they're generally grouped into 5 categories: design deficiencies, construction deficiencies, catastrophic events, lack of maintenance, and long-term deterioration. To kind of touch on design deficiencies, a design deficiency is generally due to mistake, miscommunication regarding architects and engineers or other professional designer, and it generally involves a design that fails to meet requirements or to serve customer needs, resulting in unstable or unusable products, services, environments. Here we see a couple extreme examples where, you know, obviously the design didn't account for various aspects that led to uncomfortable or unworkable situations. Go ahead and, you know, a design deficiency can be something as simple as an inadequately sized area drain or a patio improperly sloped. You know, here we see a pretty extreme example where there was a miscommunication or a lack of proper communication between contractor supplier that was suggesting modification of plans to the engineer and or designer, and which led to a collapse that led to fatalities and massive amounts of damage. Another type of structural failure is construction deficiency. Construction deficiencies occur when building elements are not built or installed per construction documents and or code requirements or standard practices, and can be something as simple as lack of proper flashing slash weatherproofing around windows or balconies. You know, one of the main things we see are lack of proper weatherproofing. As noted earlier, you know, how big is the risk? Out of a 2007 study, 17 construction defect claims, over 2/3 of them were related to moisture-related defects in building enclosure systems, water getting in where it wasn't supposed to, leading to $9 billion annually, $9 billion a year in repairing and litigating damages from moisture intrusion. Here's kind of another extreme example of construction deficiency where a Dallas crane collapsed in 2019, and something as small as not checking bolts, seeing if they're loose, missing, or deteriorating led to collapse of a crane, and again, massive amounts of damage and a loss of life. And it's just, something that seems like a small oversight can lead to catastrophic events. Here's another example about how some deficiencies are hidden and won't be visible until something has failed. We had a open sided storage structure, work structure, that did not have adequate embedment of J-bolts into the foundation. They were small, less than 3 inches in length and small diameter, and popped when exposed to wind forces. And some of these construction deficiencies you don't see until they're exposed due to collapse or pullout. Something you'll probably encounter more often is water intrusion due to lack of sealants or some other type of construction deficiency. On the left, you can see some slight staining adjacent to a patio and near window treatments that don't really show much on the exterior and may not show much on the interior either until you take off exterior finishes and see the extent of deterioration. You can see in the second picture where exterior stucco or EIFS had been removed, and you have extensive deterioration to wood elements below a Juliet window where penetrations may have been improperly sealed. And similar to that on a second floor balcony, due to lack of proper weatherproofing, you have long-term deterioration of supporting beam elements, which could ultimately lead to collapse and a potential threat to life safety. An example of construction deficiency, lack of sealants, where something doesn't look that bad on the surface, could be letting in a little bit of water year after year, and underneath this could be extensive deteriorated wood elements. So something as simple as a lack of sealant at discontinuity in exterior finishes can lead to extensive damage to the structure underneath.
Thanks, Dirk. Another cause of structural failure is a catastrophic event. This is defined as either a natural or man-made incident that results in substantial damage or loss. Some examples are snowstorms, tornadoes, wildfires, hurricanes, vehicle impacts, and hailstorms, floodings, etc. I've included some photos of catastrophic events that we've been to. The first image on the left is a vehicle impact to a residence. Thankfully, there was no loss of life in this instance, but there was some pretty severe structural damage to the front elevation. The second photo in the middle is a fire that started on a balcony at an apartment complex and made its way up into the attic and eventually across 12 units, and created some pretty substantial fire damage. Third photo is a tornado that hit Dallas in 2019, causing some pretty substantial damage to some roofs and structures around this area.
And I'd like to add to that, sometimes the damage can be a lot less obvious than this, and you can have a fire nearby or a tornado nearby that the damage is not obvious, but needs to be investigated more thoroughly to determine if there's been an effect on the structure.
Very good point. One other cause for structural failures is the lack of maintenance, and this is a very important one because if there's lack of maintenance, that's going to shorten the lifespan of building components. Not maintaining your building can lead to performance issues such as structural integrity, moisture intrusion, deformations, and displacements. The first image here is showing a perimeter edge beam on a slab on grade foundation. Some pretty significant spalling and exposed rebar that has corroded, potentially reducing the strength of the foundation at that location. The second photo is a roof that was over a mobile mart, and you can see some pretty deteriorated sealants as well as previous repair attempts that are not addressing the actual cause of the water intrusion, which in this case is a deteriorated sealant at the transition between the screw that's used to fasten that metal panel down to the supporting elements. So that being said, you know, the investigation of roofs for this type of damage should be done at certain points of time.
Yeah, such things like this, sealants, gaskets, there's a lot of building elements that have a finite life and that need to be maintained or replaced regularly to avoid water intrusion and more serious problems down the line.
Yeah, specific in this climate, it does not take a lot of water to do a lot of damage to a structure, whether it's concrete, metal, or wood, especially in wood structures. Just a little bit of water trapped inside of that wall cavity can lead to some very significant structural damage to the exterior wall systems.
So one other cause, kind of talking about the lifespan of things, is long-term deterioration, and that is, you know, building materials have an anticipated life expectancy, at which point in time they need to be repaired or replaced. In the previous example, that sealant that was deteriorated, those gaskets that the screws use should have been replaced, but instead it was something that was patched over and not addressed properly. Life expectancy of these materials can be shortened due to adverse conditions such as marine environments, excess moisture conditions, inadequate ventilation in crawl spaces or attics, and exposure to extreme temperatures and UV rays and just the elements in general.
Yeah, you know, I don't know how many roofs that we've been on where it's well past its anticipated life expectancy, and you know they're claiming hail or wind, and it's just an old roof that, you know, needs to be replaced.
Very good point. The first image here is a elevated foundation that collapsed due to excess moisture conditions within the crawl space. The second photo is kind of your typical degradation of asphalt shingles over time. You can see some blistering and granular loss, which will reduce the lifespan of that component and might lead to some performance issues in the future, such as water intrusion into the attic space, degradation of the wood framing components in the attic. So what are some warning signs that you might encounter while you're walking around your properties? Some of the things that we look out for are spalled concrete, water intrusion that leads to moisture damage or staining. Dirk had shown a image of some flashing elements that were not properly constructed. That's an example of a source of water intrusion. Corrosion to steel or metal components, displacement cracks or separations, sponginess or bounciness when walking across a roof surface or deck, bulges in retaining walls and clogged weep holes, and penetrations in building facade, which usually occur at transitions between dissimilar materials in the facade, or could potentially be due to animal activity such as squirrels nibbling down on, you know, your shingles or whatnot, creating a penetration, which is another source of water intrusion.
Yeah, and I'd also kind of add, you know, water intrusion into the interiors of buildings at all should generally be avoided, as well as, you know, anything moving or having moved that shouldn't.
We live here in North Texas, where probably some of the hottest soils in the country, and similar to Denver, and that we see a lot of foundation movement, and these things are inherently difficult and expensive to fix. So if you start seeing cracking, having trouble with doors or windows not opening, definitely reach out to an expert. Make sure you get that addressed quickly, because once they start moving, it's very, very difficult to go back.
So we're gonna go through some photos here, kind of showing some warning signs that we observed while out on site visits or investigations. This first example is a screen wall that is supported on top of a retaining wall. And we noticed some pretty significant cracking occurring at the screen wall level, as well as the pilaster that supports that screen wall. So this could be a sign of movement of the retaining wall itself, or some other situation that's causing this. So cracking and displacement is kind of the main thing that you need to look out for.
You know, and these walls can get up to pretty significant heights. And when you put a screen wall on top of it, you're looking at quite a bit of potential energy if pieces of these walls start falling. And so not only are, you know, you're looking out for your wall, but it could be a potential threat to life safety if allowed to continue.
Yeah, very good point. Yeah, these were approximately 20 feet in height. So if something were to fail, it could potentially cause some life safety issues. So here is a apartment complex that we were doing a property condition assessment on. The first image is showing a stair landing on the second floor. We conducted a destructive opening at this location due to some staining that was observed on the trim at the perimeter of that edge beam, as well as some displacement and deflection of the edge beam. So we dug in a little bit further, pulled out that siding that looks really nice and new, and exposed a beam that was that exhibited some extensive rot and deterioration. So just because something looks good on the outside doesn't mean that it's in proper structural condition on the inside. One other example here is a balcony stack at the same apartment. And one thing to look out for is, like I said, some displacement or hidden damage. So any movement could indicate a more serious issue that's occurring behind the scenes. This photo shows a bowing out or a bowed out wall on the left side there, pointed out by the yellow arrow, and some discrepancy with the columns. On the first floor, they had a column that was supporting the edge beam, while on the second floor, there was nothing supporting it, and it's the same configuration balcony. So that just brings up the question of, was it added on after the fact, or is there a deficiency on the second floor where that beam is not supported properly? Here's another example of a destructive opening that we completed. This is a balcony wall that is approximately 3 stories high. We noticed that the wall was bowing out of plane and rotating. So we had conducted this destructive opening, and you can see that that beam has crushed fibers at the left end support. And it appears that it has some paint on the surface, which means that someone had opened this thing up and completely ignored the fact that the beam has failed and rotated. So definitely don't ignore these types of issues if you do see them, because it's just going to get worse, and it looks like there's some water intrusion that was causing this issue.
Right, so that's a stair landing, and you know, we'll often see kind of exterior elements, landings, patios, et cetera, that have a little bit more exposure to the elements that over time, hidden, can experience extensive deterioration that will eventually present a threat to life safety. So if you do see deteriorated wood such as this, it needs to be addressed in a structural manner and not just covered over.
There's some additional examples here. This is a balcony stack that was similar to the previous one that we saw in the previous slide. And one thing that caught my attention are the offset columns. Usually you want something to line up properly so that the load gets transferred. Here, there's something that just didn't add up. Some of the points here are the first floor post was rotated, and not anchored down to the concrete properly, so it had displaced and was in direct contact with the concrete, which would lead to long-term deterioration of that element. On the third photo, there was a pretty substantial crack going directly through that column. So, you know, these are the types of warning signs that you need to look out for. If something doesn't add up, then have someone take a look at it and investigate it a little bit further, because it could indicate a potential, you know, field modification to address a more serious underlying issue, which could potentially lead to collapse and loss of life. Here's a balcony that we did a destructive opening on. The edge beam was actually deflecting excessively and was displaced out of plane. So it was just an area that we wanted to uncover to see what was going on behind that painted trim. And the edge beam was completely rotted out and was actually fractured at the midpoint. And you can see that they've probably added a newer beam on the left side of this balcony. So there was someone that observed this issue and completely ignored it and just added some trim on top of it and painted it and called it a day, when it could lead to a serious issue down the line. Here are some typical warning signs at roof and foundations. The first image is some staining to the roof eave soffit and some corrosion to the gutter. And you know, this could be as simple as water just getting in at the soffit, but eventually that water will find its way into the main structure, causing some pretty serious structural issues. So if you see any staining to soffits or sheathing and whatnot, then you know, you need to look into it a little bit further, uncover these issues, and see what's going on behind there. The second photo is a exposed post-tensioning anchor at the edge of the foundation, and it's pretty severely corroded, which means that it's been exposed for quite a while. This could potentially lead to a degradation of that steel and the anchor, which could cause a loss of support for that anchor and some potential foundation issues. So, talking about construction deficiencies and perforations into the building envelope. The first image here on the top left corner is showing a displaced post at a second floor stair landing. You can see that the original location of the anchors are nowhere near where the post currently sits. This could indicate that the post was either replaced at a certain point in time or it has displaced because it was not anchored properly. The photo on the top right corner is an opening in the building envelope at the transition between a brick and siding. And this has caused water intrusion into the structure, which eventually led to the edge beam of the balcony rotting out and causing some pretty serious floor system issues on the interior of the unit. So cracked tiles, displaced floors, and floors that were deflecting excessively. So these are retaining walls that you would usually see at transitions between a higher grade or lower grade over the perimeter of a property. Here we see some pretty significant cracking, displacement, and bulging of that retaining wall, which indicates that there's either an overload at the top portion of the retaining wall that's causing it, or maybe some clogged weep holes that have caused some excessive hydrostatic pressure behind the wall, which is causing it to bulge. And you can see in the first photo that they've added some sealants between the cracks in order to remedy this situation, but it really is little bit more complicated than just adding a sealant to it. And at that point, a specialist needs to be called in to further investigate this issue before a serious collapse happens.
And, as we stated earlier, these walls can get pretty tall, and there's a lot of different reasons that they can be having issues. Sometimes it can be because maybe a pool was installed directly behind it, or, there's a different type of use or a heavy truck. And a lot of properties have these type of stone masonry retaining walls, and there's many different ways it can fail. So the things you're looking for, cracking, movement, bulges, if these walls get pretty tall and are adjacent to pedestrian walkways or where people, kids will play, it can be a potential threat to life safety. All right, thanks, Sam. Continuing on, this is kind of an example of water and where it shouldn't be. Balconies are typically intended to drain to an interior drain or off the exterior end of the balcony, and not between the balcony and interior walls. When you see staining like this, that indicates that water is draining in a way that it shouldn't and has the potential to infiltrate into the interior building envelope and cause rot and other issues with water intrusion. More water on the interior. Water on the interior is bad. We see here staining on ceiling tiles, dead giveaway for water getting in where it shouldn't be. Puffiness, wrinkling of paint in the left photo, that indicates water is getting in and getting into that wall system where it can cause additional problems. A lot of times we see cracking, staining of paint finishes adjacent to windows, indicating potential issues with flashing around window systems or water coming through the window itself. These, anytime you have water on the interior of a building, it behooves you to find out where it is and get it fixed in a positive fashion. Here's an example of, we have slight visible deterioration on a soffit under a stairwell. You can see on the right, someone had done superficial repairs that could hide more serious damage. Going and looking further and taking off the soffit, you can see extensive deterioration of the wood framing and decking supporting that landing, such that definitely represents a threat, a potential threat to life safety. So finishes may need to be removed to reveal condition of elements beneath. Sometimes the deterioration can be quite extensive, where you have completely deteriorated wood framing for a staircase landing or a patio, and that's considered long-term deterioration coupled with lack of maintenance. Again, this is like addressing the problem early when you first start seeing water staining and fixing the problem. Here's an example of hidden damage that's not easily visible. You see a stairway from far away, and it's got a nice fresh coat of paint on it, and it looks in good condition. You get underneath, and you see extensive deterioration to the metal decking and framing, such that you could have a potential threat to life safety. You can see that there's a temporary repair to one of the treads with a wood 4x4. Another giveaway that there's a potential issue here. Looking out for rust and section loss on metal elements. Sometimes it can be extreme where you have obvious issues that need to be addressed, but anytime you start seeing rust or deterioration, definitely would recommend addressing it as soon as possible and remedying the situation prior to letting it get to a point where it could, be a potential threat to life safety. How and when to respond? Answer is always now. Like taking care of your car, you want to check the oil regularly, you want to make sure the fluids are maintained. And that is similar to having an educated maintenance guy walk the buildings, get on the roofs, have a good understanding of what the overall condition is. Another important data point is to listen to reports from your occupants. If they're having issues with water intrusion, or if they're seeing staining, or they're indicating that a landing seems to be moving or bouncing when they're walking across it, that may indicate that you need to have maintenance personnel look at it, or if it's a more complex problem, a professional engineer specialist that can, evaluate it and potentially provide repair recommendations. One of the main things is, ignoring a problem, putting lipstick on issues does not typically fix the underlying issue and can lead to much, much bigger problems. If you have water intrusion and, you have some slight staining, putting kills on it and repainting will fix the staining for now, but could eventually lead to long-term deterioration where you're having to remove whole sections to replace the wood framing. So as far as, considering your car, you have regular checkups, you take your car to the mechanic regularly, you listen to your car, you don't just turn up the radio louder, and you report issues to your mechanic when you have them. Next slide. Yep. Okay. So as far as when to respond, you're maintaining your property. You're grading and drainage. You're making sure things are draining right. You're getting up on your roof systems, checking for damage, making sure your gutters are clear and draining properly. Building enclosure, you hear about leaks, you're addressing them, you're fixing them, you're finding out where they're coming from. If your foundation appears to be moving excessively, you get it addressed by a professional. As far as, understanding your building, making sure you have documentation regarding construction, previous repairs. If you're new onto a site, just having a good understanding of the buildings you're maintaining is critical to make sure the performance is good. And then, if you're coming on a new project altogether, property conditions assessments to identify existing issues and plan for what you might need to pay for, as well as addressing immediate repairs versus repairs that are short-term but don't need to be addressed immediately can be performed.
So, with that, just a quick recap on the services that we do provide. We do serve as an engineer of record that investigates a lot of these types of failures, but also as somebody who will produce documents and oversee the implementation of the repairs. I know over the years, we've had the great privilege of working with so many Worth-Ross properties, and I do want to sincerely say thank you to all of those that we've worked with in the past, and also add that I look forward to getting to meet those of you that I have not yet. And so with all that in mind, I think we are doing really good on time. We'll go ahead and open it up to any questions in the audience.
Thanks, guys. So we had a couple questions submitted ahead of time that we'll go through first. And some of these you might have answered through the presentation, but I'm going to ask them again just so everyone can hear the answers again. So the photos that you gave, the examples you provided were excellent. However, in an association setting, we're juggling a lot of different things from immediate needs of the association, right? All of our associations are not-for-profit. They're a zero-based budget, so kind of have a fixed number of dollars they can work with year in, year out. And same could be said for their reserve study and reserve planning. So a lot of the examples you showed via pictures were at the later stages when it becomes increasingly obvious. But for our boards and for our team that is on this call, what is kind of the initial idea or initial kind of warning sign that we should probably consult with an engineer? So yeah, we'll kind of leave it at that.
So some of the initial warning signs that you'll see, if we're looking at foundation movement as an example, I think hairline cracking in drywall is not something that will occur on its own. That is definitely an indication that you've got some movement in the structure, whether it's the foundation, the walls, or something. as soon as you see that, you definitely want to reach out to a professional engineer, have that investigated. And a lot of times it has to do with maintaining moisture in the soil. And so the recommendations may include removal of trees or shrubs or grading and drainage improvements. There may be some other underlying issues going on, but the sooner the better on that stuff. As far as water intrusion into the building envelope, Dirk, you really did a good job of mentioning staining and looking for, bulges in paint, any kind of sagging on the ceilings or stained ceiling tiles. These are things that oftentimes a good contractor can repair, but I'll caution that most of the times the systems that actually keep your facility dry are concealed by exterior and interior finishes. So your claddings, your drywalls, things like that. And so if you start to see staining near your windows or below your roof or at your balconies or anywhere else, I would definitely encourage you to make sure that the contractor you're hired is not just putting sealant all over them, because that could potentially conceal that moisture and trap it within the assembly versus protecting it from getting in there in the first place. So hopefully that adds some additional context for you, Matt.
Yeah, thank you. Let's see. So how often should an association consider an inspection from a structural engineer?
A structural engineer isn't necessarily something you have on a schedule. The main thing is to have a good understanding of your complex and have an educated, whether it's a maintenance staff or otherwise, an educated person that can walk around and get a general feel for the building, get up on the roof, be able to get inside units and look for the signs that we talked about earlier, such as cracking, water staining. Whenever you're turning over a unit, say it's a rental property, and you're doing that, the make ready, you check for cracks, you check for staining, anything that would indicate, hey, we're having kind of a something going on here that shouldn't be. But as far as a structural engineer, if it's something that, man, we have water coming in here and we're not sure where it's coming from, we definitely specialize in chasing leaks up and figuring out what's going on, as well as foundation movement. Texas soils are terrible. You're going to have some cracking. Now, is it something that is going to potentially cause more extreme severe issues? That is something that, is best addressed, early in the process, and we can help you do that.
So if I were to sum that up, it sounds like as significant issues are identified by your on-site maintenance personnel or contractors performing routine maintenance work.
Okay, got it. Thank you. This is a question that was just submitted. So do you provide inspection services related to transition from developer to owner control?
Yes, we do perform transition studies. We'd be happy to help with that.
Definitely a lot of property condition.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So can you go into a little more detail as to how PI works alongside management and the board when an issue is identified, whether it's water intrusion or another example? What is PI's role in the remediation of that issue?
So generally speaking, our role is to diagnose what the origin of the issue is, and then we become more of an educator to the board and to the property manager as to what happened and what the most appropriate path forward is. We recognize that, many of the HOA boards are professionals that may not have a construction or an engineering background, and so I'd say that, we look to educate as much as we can so that they can comprehend the issues and make informed decisions on how best to maintain the structure.
So does PI stay engaged if the association has chosen a vendor to fix the work, a GC, what have you? Does PI stay engaged at that stage to oversee the vendor? Help us understand what that looks like too from your perspective.
Sure. Yeah, we certainly can. It depends on the magnitude and the nature of the issue. So if it's a seemingly simple repair, we can write up a scope, educate the association and the property manager on what that would entail, and let them run with it from there. If there is interest, we can absolutely step in and assist with competitive contractor bidding processes, tabulating bids and presenting numbers in a way that's easily understandable so that they can select the appropriate contractor, reviewing all of the product data that they're going to put on the facility to make sure it's compatible and appropriate for the use, and then performing quality assurance observations and oversight during the implementation of the repairs. That is a full service that we offer here at PI.
Absolutely.
Okay. So kind of switching gears, association boards and managers rely heavily on reserve studies for planning for those large capital assets to be repaired, replaced, etc., like a roof as an example. So how can boards and managers better determine when an item like a roof or other structural item is at the end of its useful life, instead of saying, well, the reserve study says we have 5 years left, when in the reality is they might only have a year left? What are some signs that boards and or our team can look out for when it comes to those sorts of things?
And that kind of plays into the regular observations and staying on top of your maintenance schedule and making sure you're aware of how your different building elements are performing. If you're getting up on your roof, once a year, you should be able to see how it is doing, because there's a lot of shingles that are called to be 30, 50 year that in Texas sun don't last near that long. So, as far as evaluating and listening to your tenants and your regular maintenance personnel and getting a good feel, occasionally bringing in contractors or engineers to help with that, you can get a better idea of what your schedule represents and what might need more immediate replacement.
And I'll just add to a word of caution. The reserve studies that are done, those guys are very well versed in a lot of different building elements. They do tend to paint with a broad brushstroke, and so when it comes to major capital projects, we would encourage you guys to reach out to us. We'd be happy to look at something, help give you a gut check on a reserve budget number, even if it's 2 to 5 years in advance, because there's nothing more challenging when coming into one of these large projects and having to have the conversation about how it was grossly underestimated to the tune of 3 or 4 times. So yeah, to Dirk's point, definitely stay on top of your routine maintenance. Look for things like degradation and deterioration. That's your warning signs. Talk with your trade partners, your roofers and others about what the expectant or the remaining service life would be. But then as you're planning for large facade or balcony or roof replacement projects, definitely engage a professional to give you a gut check on those numbers so that you're not caught off guard when the time comes to actually implement that.
Right. There's a lot of systems that have anticipated life expectancy, whether it's a roofing or curtain wall or, even a parking garage. So, there's anticipated lives and then there's the actual condition.
Thank you. Good responses. So kind of shifting gears again, as it relates to, commercial buildings, a high-rise condominium building. In your experience, you all have seen a little bit of everything as it relates to issues and problems with these structures. So is there a common theme in different areas where building maintenance would have done a few proactive things, would have made problems a lot less severe? Like common items that we should be proactively considering, whether it's yearly, semi-annually, every 5 years, every 10 years, instead of waiting until, it's too late.
A lot of it depends on the nature of the construction, obviously, but, one of the main things I see is as far as roofs leaking and causing further problems is not maintaining sealants or staying on top of whether the roof is performing adequately, such as ponding water, et cetera. You know, water sealants don't have the life expectancy that the rest of the building elements typically do, and so they're one of the first things to go. So as far as part of a maintenance program, one of the things I guess I'd recommend first is that, you know, your temporary or your less long-lived elements such as sealants or coatings, gaskets, your more perishable type building elements are maintained and replaced in a timely manner.
So what is the life expectancy of a sealant or paint versus, you know, the roof itself?
You know, your typical, say, comp shingle roof is supposed to be good for about 20 years, and that can vary for a variety of reasons. Sealants, depending on application and type, can last well less than that. And a lot of times it's just a matter of, you know, the roofer has relied on sealant for a variety of reasons around a roof penetration. And if that's not checked and maintained over the life of the roof, it can be one of the first things to leak.
So as a rule of thumb, Dirk, just thinking out loud to quantify this a bit, because I know it does depend, but should we look at in a commercial application sealants every 5 years, 10 years?
They should be looking at them every year. You should be getting up on your roof every year and doing a walk of it with, you know, an experienced maintenance or a professional to take a look at the sealants, see how they're performing, see if they need to be removed and reapplied or replaced entirely.
Okay.
So, you know, because you can have roofs like a good solid built-up roof with gravel ballast that can last 50 years, you know, if maintained and stayed on top of. But I've seen many times where that roof's in great shape, but the exposed flashing has deteriorated almost completely away.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, it kind of ties into just being aware of it. Like we raised the car symbolism. If you're maintaining your car, if you're taking it in for regular checkups and oil changes, if you're taking it to a mechanic when there's a more serious problem, that will alleviate a lot of more serious problems later on.
All right, thank you. So there's no more questions on my end. I'm not sure if y'all had anything else you'd like to share. If not, we will wrap up about 5 minutes early today.
I think we're good on our end. So again, thank you everybody for joining us today. We've really enjoyed the opportunity to present to you. I do hope that it was educational, and we look forward to continuing to work with Worthross and your properties.
Yeah, and if y'all ever have any questions, please feel free to reach out.
Sure.
We'll see if we can answer them.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks everyone. Have a great evening, and we'll see you next time.
All right.
Thank you.